What if I told you there was an alternative ending for Joe's most compatible love interest? The one that gave as good as she got and was the fiercest that he ever came up against. Obviously, I'm talking about Love Quinn. Well, it turns out that there actually is an alternative way that the character was written out of the story, one where she didn't meet her demise at the hands of Joe Goldberg. Rather, she met her end because of what she thought she supposedly did to him and wiped her hands clean of him. Within the novel You Love Me, Love Quinn's mind took a similar trajectory to what we saw in the show, but her death was completely different. So with that, I thought it would be worth sharing how most of our favourite love interest of Joe's went out of the story in a different way to the show. And trust me, the story and climax is just as dramatic as what we saw in the TV series. So let's get into it. Here is Love Quinn's alternative ending in You. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. Now, love doesn't actually feature that largely in the third installment in the series of books. Rather, what happens is a result of her not spending that much time with Joe and realizing that their pathways aren't going in the direction that she initially thought they would when they first fell for each other. First, we're gonna have to go back to the end of Hidden Bodies, which is the second novel, to gain context. During the ending of Hidden Bodies, Joe ends up getting arrested because he's implicated for the murders of Beck and Peach, something that it took right the way up to the end of Season 5 for us to see in the show. However, with Joe being arrested, whilst under suspicion for the murders, he isn't actually that fazed or worried about what'll happen because he feels like Love's super wealthy family will bail him out of jail because of Love's deep-rooted feelings of care that she has towards him. This is something that does actually end up happening in the novel. However, him being saved by the family and having the fees paid for came with a large caveat. This caveat was that he had to stay as far away as possible from their daughter, Love Quinn, and if he did so, then the family would give him a large amount of money to stay away, several $1,000,000. This was something that Joe took up and was able to do with ease because he's a master at slipping off into the night, creating a new identity and staying hidden under the radar. So he relocated to just outside of Washington on Bainbridge Island. One thing that happened during the ending of the Hidden Bodies novel as well that holds importance was that Love Quinn gave birth to their son whilst Joe was in prison. So he hadn't actually met his child before due to him being told to leave the moment that he was released. This is something that's vital when it comes to Love's ending in the third book. With Joe going off to Bainbridge Island, the usual happened with him. He found a new girl, a local librarian, and he ended up falling in love with her and stalking her, despite trying his hardest to not fall into old habits. However, as the ending got closer, with Joe having been bribed to stay away from Love, a result of that was that he'd never met his son. However, he'd continue to check up with what she and the family were doing on social media. Within the show, Joe's relationship with his father and his mother and not wanting to become them is something that's at the heart of the character. So both iterations of Joe shared that mindset and wanted to be a present force in their child's life, especially because he'd never seen him before. So in knowing that, Love reached out to him and used that as a way of luring him to LA where they'd be in private together, something that hadn't happened since before his arrest at the end of Hidden Bodies. Once they were alone in a room together, Love pulled a gun on Joe, and when she did, she wasn't just brandishing it as a threat, she had full intentions of killing him. With that, Love ultimately fired at him and it hit him in the head, causing Joe to drop. It was here where Love believed that she killed Joe and ended the life of the person that she loved most in the world. However, that wasn't actually the case at all. It turned out that Joe survived the shot that Love inflicted towards him, but in believing that Joe was dead, she turned the weapon on herself and ended things. And for her, her story did conclude because she wasn't as lucky as Joe and ended up succumbing to her own hands, not Joe's, like what occurred in the show. There's something sinister, poetic, and haunting about Love ending things for herself because she believed that she ridded the world of Joe Goldberg and prevented anybody else from being with him because she viewed him as hers, when in actual fact he ended up surviving and going on to continue with his ways on other people. So within the novel, Love did end up meeting the same fate as what she did in the show, but arguably you could say it was more dramatic, it was darker, and she was under the impression that she killed Joe, so it was quite different. I did love the climax in season 3 of the TV series and the scene that occurred with Love setting out to kill Joe, kind of similar to how the setting and backdrop was for what happened in the novel. But the twist with Joe showing how intelligent he was and that he managed to outsmart her was something that provided a lot of drama, and it had me rooting for him in that moment. Within the novel, Joe's intelligence wasn't what saved him, it was just sheer luck. I think the novel's depiction of Love's death is one that's arguably more suited to the character of Love. Love absolutely adored Joe, and she was basically the female version of him with the mindsets that they shared. However, there was a difference with her when compared to Joe. She wasn't as calculated as what Joe was, in the sense that she acted more on impulse and there wasn't much planning behind what she did. So her burning desire to be with Joe and her obsession was filled with fire and spontaneity, hence why she had a gun and planned on using it on a whim. Unlike in the TV series where she had this meticulous plan of poisoning Joe slowly and her sitting there watching him as he gradually lost the motor functions of his body until he ended up dead. That is dark, but Love continues on after that, and after seeing how she actually is and reading how her story ends in the novel, I don't actually know if she would have been able to have continued on without Joe. There was a sense of reliance, obsession, and codependency in their relationship on Love's side, in the sense that she loved and adored him, and he did her, but he could still have a wandering eye and fall for somebody else. Where I just couldn't see Love living a happy life once Joe was dead, so her ending things for herself felt somewhat more tonally appropriate. Now we've got the big question on which ending for the character is better, the TV series or the one in the novel. The thing is, with the TV series, I think it's arguably one of the greatest episodes that you has ever had, and after season 3 episode 10, the show definitely took a real dip in quality. So it kind of marked the end of such a strong era of the show, as it even trumped episode 9 and 10 from the final season, which should have been the strongest. The slow, drawn-out nature of it, the twist that occurred with Joe realizing what she did and doing to Love what she planned on doing to him, it's genuinely perfect. Add into the mix that Exile by Bon Iver and Taylor Swift was playing in the background. The scene was set perfectly and it unpacked in a hauntingly beautiful way, allowing Joe to get away with it in the most dramatic and Joe Goldberg of fashions. With the You Love Me novel, I think it probably was a true reflection of the mindset that Love Quinn had, and I also think her using their son as a pawn because she knew what a relationship with his child meant to him, firing a weapon at him, believing that he was dead, and her seeing that as a trigger to end things because it meant that nobody else could be with him and that she was the person that was in control and dictated that felt truer to the character's mind. I can almost envisage the scene unfolding within my mind, and instead of it being a cold, expressionless, and emotionless love like we had in the season 3 finale, I could see it being more like the emotional one that we had in season 2. Unhinged, uncontrollable, obsessed, and erratic with the way that she was acting. The version of Love in the novel was one that didn't want to let Joe go, whereas in the TV series she'd made up her mind that she didn't need Joe in her life anymore. So from a tonal perspective, I actually think Love's demise coming at her own hands, highlighting how unhinged she was and becoming a victim of her own obsession is a little bit more tonally appropriate for the character. But that doesn't take away my love for the season 3 finale. It would have been interesting seeing this version depicted on screen, but like I said, I can definitely imagine it playing out and it feels reminiscent of the love that we got at the ending of season 2. So, there you have it, Love Quinn's alternative ending in You. If you want to see every season of You being broken down, then check the videos below, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future videos. Which ending of the character did you prefer? Share your thoughts in the comments. As always, thanks for tuning into the video and I'll see you in the next one.